how do you actually apply all the personal development, esoteric, and mystical teachings into your real life?
Maybe you've heard about astrology or human design or Taoism or the Kabbalah. Now, let's bring these ideas back to the human experience,
Finding their edges and applications so that we can engage in life in the most expansive and embodied way.
This is the Mystical Human Podcast. And today we are talking about social media, whether or not it's a detriment or the ultimate classroom for healing and building your intuition. I'm Rachel, one of your hosts. I'm here with the lovely Ash.
Hi, everyone.
I think this is a topic it just so naturally flows with our intro episode. We really wanted to talk about it because while this podcast is not technically social media, it is a form of media that we're consuming. So a lot of this experience I had with social media that I'm so excited to share today, and these different tools that we can talk about to really shift it from being a detrimental aspect that harms us to literally free therapy if you choose to take it, applies to listening to this podcast and any media you're consuming, really. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some spiritual principles, maybe even cliches you've heard before, but how they actually have quite a bit of substance to bring with you when you're logging on or consuming media. We're going to talk about how you can use that experience to then workshop and give yourself free therapy, essentially, and really expand your container, looking whether it's at your childhood trauma, reactivity of different storylines playing out in your day-to-day life to end up creating more peace and freedom in your life in a way that feels less anxiety producing, or I don't know, just those icky feelings we can get from being on social media sometimes. We're looking to downgrade those with some practical tools when you guys walk away from this.
Yeah, so I'm sure that everybody's heard of the law of attraction. I think that's a really common one. There's these 12 universal laws that come from the Hermetic text, actually like back in ancient Egypt, and they really are beautiful to look up. I think we'll probably eventually talk in deeper context about them. But the idea is that there's these governing laws that allow us to actually see ourselves in the world that we're creating, like as above, so below. That's another universal law that's very beautiful to understand and to be able to see that we are repeating or we are bringing into our reality what is actually going from the inside out. We actually can then use social media platforms or what we're digesting and what we're taking in as a feedback loop to help us actually see ourselves more clearly. And at the end of the day, we are all here in this earth school having these human experiences. And so we can actually see the world from many different places of consciousness. We can understand the world through why is this happening to me? Or we can come from judgment, or we can get in there and we can actually ask the bigger questions and know that the creator is the only real judgment at the end of every day. And we get to actually be here and play with it. So I'm excited. And I actually would love to hear, Rachel, could you share with us a little bit about why this came up for you and how you started playing with it yourself?
It was back in 2020 when everybody was feeling a lot of emotions. And what happened essentially was I was in a conversation with a family member and I just spit vitriol. There's no way around it. I walked away and I was like, what was that? I almost felt possessed what came through me in that moment. And I'm like, why am I judging? Why am I fighting this fight? What was that? This felt terrible in my body. And instead of sinking into like guilt or shame or embarrassment, which would be, I think, the very common place that we're taught to go, those are safe, I decided to take a step back and be like, okay, if I'm holding on to some sort of view or perception that can essentially hijack my reaction to somebody and throw out everything I knew, which is that everyone's going through something, only God can judge, I'm not here to be the judge and jury or whatever. And if something could really kind of just move me in such a way that I didn't even recognize myself, I need to look at this and I need to sit with this and I need to create more space and capacity for other perspectives because I'm clearly not feeling safe in my body. I think a common phrase is like, if we're feeling triggered, it's showing us a wound we need to heal. We can know that information, but it's a very different thing to be like, oh, okay, this is something I have to sit with because I don't want to be coursing with adrenaline from something that should be just a level of acceptance, a level of understanding, a level of witnessing somebody else on their journey. And I challenged myself all of a sudden because, I think it's fairly commonplace to know that social media, the algorithms are designed to create a silo where it only shows us ourselves back.
Yes, that's the law of attraction.
Yeah, it creates a false sense of safety too. Like, okay, well, at least everyone's angry about this, or at least everybody is attracted to this, or whatever it is. It's like I am sitting on a false mine of safety right now. Otherwise, I would not have just exploded. And I need to go in, not involving the people in my real life, but I need to go in and witness and understand how other people can hold different views, how their lived experiences got them to where they are. So that way, when I am face to face with them, I'm not reactive because we all know yelling at somebody, demeaning somebody, being reactive, that is not how we get anybody to change their perspective. And we all know that, well, not we all know, but like,
I was going to say, I don't think we all know this. I think this is actually a really big deal for you to actually be able to see that I could go argue all day with this person. But instead of going to do that, to realize that that's actually not going to cultivate connection or understanding. And then to choose to actually go and work on yourself and go get that data that actually does oppose your own experience. I feel like that actually takes a lot of courage.
thank you. I've seen other people play this story out since then with their own journey where they decided to test their faith and say, like, I'm going to go ahead, like you said it last time, take the ball of yarn of my beliefs, be a kid, pull it apart and see how strongly held my beliefs actually are, or if they were built on a sandy hill that's going to fly out from under them in a hurricane. And so the idea was essentially to go in, see everything. And what I started to realize was that the views I was holding and that were triggering me so much, well, I did identify with an aspect of them, allowing me to see the gray and to see the in between. It actually allowed me to bring a lot more love and compassion to others, but also to myself, and seeing like, oh, okay, that's where I was overly reactive. There's something called the Karpman's triangle, which I feel like therapy talk has become quite mainstream. Everyone, I think, knows what victim talk is, but Karpman's triangle actually has 3 different aspects. So there's the victim, the perpetrator, and then the third one. It's like the codependent, the rescuer is what it's called. What ends up happening in that, and a lot of people don't like to sit with this, but all victims end up becoming perpetrators unless they step out of the triangle. And so I recognized, oh, okay, I was once, the victim of somebody like getting mad and lashing out at their views on me. And now I'm doing it to somebody else. And, I'm trying to also be the rescuer and playing out my codependency. Well, I just don't want anything to happen to you if you keep thinking like this or you keep doing this. And so it's like this really vicious cycle. We spend all day dancing between this, whether it's with our kids, our spouses, at work, with people on social media, in the comment section, whatever. And all of a sudden just realized, I was like, oh, this is the coolest classroom where I don't have to blow up my life. I don't have to get into a fight with the people that I'm face to face with. And I can actually just sit in my body while I'm witnessing. There's nobody standing in front of me waiting for me to respond. There's no timeline for me to make sense of what's coming up. I just need to show up every day and see where my edges are and see where I can push them and see where I can bring more understanding. And that doesn't mean I necessarily end up agreeing with the people that were once triggering me, but they no longer trigger me, and I can see an aspect of myself in that.
Would you intentionally sit down and pull up your social media and know that you were going to go looking for the beliefs that actually were not in alignment with your own? Like, would you curate that time, or how did that come about?
Yeah.
You would. So amazing.
Yeah, I literally went and found, I remember it was 5 Instagram accounts that I legitimately thought were neo-Nazi accounts at that time. Like, I was raised Jewish. This is 2020. And I literally had people DMing me being like, I saw that you were following these accounts. I've been a longtime follower of you and they're dangerous and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden I found myself, if you remember last time I said I always argue for the underdog, whether or not I agree with them. I literally said to this girl, I agree with you. I'm trying to understand them though. And so this is the best way for them to come up. And she unfollowed me and she got mad at me. And I was like, you've literally followed me for 5 years and I'm telling you why I'm doing what I'm doing, but you just cut me off. And I know she's a stranger and I shouldn't care. But it just ended up being more confirmation that I needed to go down this path.
But it also shows like the level of courage that is needed to actually be able to question your own belief structure. It actually takes a good amount of courage because it is actually pushing a safety edge. And I don't think everybody is ready to push that safety edge. It's like sometimes it's just you don't have enough safety or enough courage built up to be able to actually question your own beliefs. I just feel like it also just shows courage in you doubling down on it. I feel like I don't know, it would be hard for some people depending on where they're at in their own belief structure. For her, it was like, I can't have you questioning my beliefs. I got to go. And that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
And that's where that person was at.
That's just where you're at. Yeah, totally.
And I think one of the things too that we end up in this place where when it comes to safety within ourselves, there's different seasons for life. There are seasons where, we have everything seemingly coming at us and we have less capacity to create new levels of safety and we need to rely on the old and what's worked for us. And that is okay. And then there are periods in our life where all of that stuff coming at us might be in a singular theme and it's asking us to sit with and expand our container because it's asking us to grow. I've heard this thing where like freedom and anxiety have a direct relationship. And I've seen that play out with my children as well, where I gave them so much freedom that their anxiety actually increased and I had to start adding more containers for them to feel safe. And so what I will say, like when it's coming up around a singular theme, it could be a moment of saying, okay, your container that you've been existing in is too small and we need you to create a bigger one. If it's coming from multiple different angles, it could be saying, okay, let's just slow it down and just like rely on nature and some other stuff. And that's where we have to kind of play this dance. And maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to do it for 5 minutes a day. I'm just going to show up and listen and see where it takes me. Maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to do it for 30 minutes a day or like once a week, whatever it is, just slowly dipping that toe in and letting yourself be a voyeur where you can sit in your body and see where the triggers come up and ask questions and move into discernment, because that period of discernment is really where we get to practice and increase our intuition.
And this actually aligns with the law of correspondence, because the law of correspondence is actually everything's happening for you. It's not happening to you, right? It's like the world being a mirror. And so it's like what you're describing right now is actually being able to go in and be like, cool, how is this actually happening for me? How do I actually feel where this hits in my body? And how do I learn from it? And how do I grow from it? Yeah, that's a pretty awesome tool to be able to use to go look for a social media account that actually isn't in your alignment and actually be like, cool, how do I learn from this? That's really beautiful.
I think there's this fear that if we go in and we try to learn from something that isn't in alignment with us, that we'll get swept up into the current of it. Like we'll get brainwashed or whatever it is. But I think that's where discernment starts to come in. So what does discernment mean to you?
To me, discernment is the capacity to understand where your identity starts and where it ends, or like where you want to be moving into and where you don't. Being able to actually track your own understanding of self and your own understanding of safety, right? Like the story that comes up to me in my mind is like when I was a little kid, I would have this discernment. You probably remember this of like, should I jump into the pool or should I just lower myself in? And there's this feeling that would come up of like, well, where am I today? And what feels good? And how cold is the water? Like all these little tiny steps to actually get me to the place where I can actually decide if I'm going to cannonball or if I'm going to go in slow. And that ability to actually be able to quantify or qualify where you're at in any given time and what you're feeling and be able to track yourself in that is like actually a really big skill to cultivate.
Yeah, I feel like, so often people are like, how can I open up my intuition more or whatever else it is? And it's like you asked yourself the questions and then you felt into your body. There wasn't like a data set that was like, okay, well, if you jump in the pool like this, it's going to feel like this. And that's a fact. Being able to close your eyes into that. And you can use that to like figure out what's landing for yourself in your body. And you'll also be able to eventually turn that outward and be like, oh, okay, is this person happened to me being hijacked and speaking from a place of inauthenticity? And like, that's not what their soul is actually saying. There's just something else going on. And then I can bring more compassion, or looking at somebody and saying like, oh, okay, they're being a soldier in somebody else's war right now, sending them love and compassion and just accepting where somebody's at on that journey and using your intuition when it's at that heightened sense, feeling into your body. Okay, what's their soul like? Okay, what's coming out of their mouth? Is this in alignment? Is this not? And saying, oh, okay, I can have love for this person because this is where they're at on their journey. This is not where they're going to necessarily be a month from now or 5 years from now. And I think it just allows things to really slow down, and it allows us to look at our sources of information and whether or not we're getting swept up in a fight that's not even really theirs or ours, and we can slow down.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the containment piece. Like, do you have enough containment inside of yourself to actually feel that you can take that information in and not get swallowed whole by it? And that actually is going to take discernment. And one day you might be like, let's go. I've got this. Let me jump in. And another day you might be like, I can't today. And that's where even following your intuition is a day by day, moment by moment. It's very subtle and soft. Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, knowing your human design chart, which I know we haven't jumped into too much, but I can give you guys these practical tools to at least look at. If you go to myhumandesign.com and you can plug in, you'll need your birth date, birth time, and birth location. And you're going to get some graph that, if you've never seen it before, is going to look intimidating, but just scroll down and instead really look at what's called the not self theme. And everybody has one of these. You know, I'm a manifesting generator. For MGs and generators, it's frustration. And when I feel that frustration, I say, okay, I'm not supposed to be playing in this game right now. I'm going to set it down and I'll come back to it later. Satisfaction is my sign that I'm on the right path. And when I'm feeling satisfied, even if it's like butterflies in my stomach or whatever, but I'm just like, oh, okay, I did something new today and I can feel really satisfied in that, I move forward with it and I keep going. And so knowing that not self and your sign can be, until you're building up more of your connection to your discernment and your intuition and what really is working for you, having that tool to just really singularly guide into, I found invaluable.
Totally. I'm a projector. And so mine is bitterness for all the projectors out there. So if I'm and it's really subtle for me because I'm usually in a pretty good flow these days. But when I find myself feeling that slight tone of just like, ugh, then I actually won't even open my social media at all. Like some days I don't even connect with it at all because it's just too much overflow of information. I have a lot of open channels. So I'm like a pretty sensitive soul, and I think that's the other side of it is, yes, you can use social media to actually help you push against your triggers. And at the exact same time, you don't have to. Like I've also had a lot of conversations with clients who are like, well, I have to go look at it and I have to go because it's real and it's true. And I was like, right, but do you have the resources? Do you have the capacity to not actually harm yourself while going and looking at something that's actually hard for you to look at? And that's actually not something that I can tell you to do because I don't know. I'm not inside of you. You actually have to be your own healer, your own guru, I don't know, you have to learn to track yourself, which is what human design is so helpful for.
Yeah, I love that though, because, there's times you brought up being well resourced in that. And there are times where I know that I am going and doing something that is not in alignment. And I think that's one of the other areas where it's not to bring in guilt or shame and beating ourselves up. It's just saying, like, okay, for some reason, I'm feeling called to opening social media maybe today, even though I've been feeling frustrated around it, just as an example. And I know that I'm going to probably end up having, what's that one? The law of balances,
Yep.
like as above, so below, or every karmic debt ends up having to get paid and all stuff like that. I know I'm going to have to end up paying that back energetically
Yeah.
somewhere. So if I'm choosing to move forward against my frustration, even though I tend to make sure that I'm like, okay, well, where am I going to be able to get myself into the ocean in the next 24 hours after that? Because I'm going to need something to re-clear and cleanse and reset that, because I know I'm going to end up feeling depleted. Maybe not right after I do it, possibly, but within the next 24 hours, if I don't do it, I'm going to be a goblin under the stairs assaulting my family if I don't take care of it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's actually one of the biggest pieces I witness in our current collective is the immense amount of lack of being resourced.
Yeah.
Like you need to find out what what resources you and lean into it. Really, and have a discipline around it.
Which actually leads into what I was going to talk about on this other part of social media and our hard held beliefs. We are asleep for so much of our life. We may or may not realize it. I know my old podcast, when I closed it out, like final episode, actually wasn't planning it for it to be the final episode, was all about the subconscious mind and being programmed. And I'll leave a link to it in the show notes if you guys want to go back and listen to it. It was during that 2020 time, so it's kind of heightened. But up until the age of 7, our brain waves are running on delta and theta. That is our subconscious mind. It is our operating system. And we are just taking in messages from our parents and from the world. And that ends up becoming this thing that may or may not be true for us. It was true for the people around us. It was true for the environment around us. And then it's our job to go ahead and deconstruct and build something back. But we also drop into these brainwaves when we're watching TV or when we're listening to music, when we're zoned out. If your boss is droning on and on about something, you tend to drop into those. And so we may or may not realize it, but a lot of our really hard held or triggered beliefs are oftentimes not even ours. It could have been because you glazed over as somebody else was ranting at you. And then all of a sudden that got implanted into your mind. And now you're playing that out for them because we are kind of a hive mind, if you will. And somebody else is bringing you pain and you're not conscious of it. You're operating from your subconscious. You are very likely to then play out their pain in an effort to help them heal it, whether you're aware of it or not. And that's a crazy experience.
You're completely correct. Pretty beautiful and really wild. If you understand what's happening and you can actually like use that and work with it, it's beautiful. But when you're not conscious of it, it can actually just feel really harmful and really hurtful.
Yeah. And so it's almost like sitting there and witnessing yourself and using that discernment we talked about. Oh, when I'm witnessing myself play out in this situation, does that feel in alignment? Does that feel loving? Does that feel what my soul really is craving? Or does that feel like I'm wearing a mask? Does that feel like I am an actor? Does that feel like I'm playing a role? And do I want to step out of that now?
Or is this even mine? I think that was a big question I asked myself for a really long time. Is this mine? Like, is this actually something I've inherited? Is this something in the culture? Where is this coming from? And where did I pick it up along the way? And once you understand where it's come from, once you have more awareness around it, you can actually then be more in choice of like, do I want to continue in this space and place, right? But without the awareness, we'll just keep playing it out until we bring something into our awareness. And so that's why it's really fun to actually use social media as a tool to help bring new things into your awareness that feed you and fill you up, or to challenge you, but then know that you're wanting to do it from a very active choice place versus like, I'm just going to sit here and be challenged all day, every day. It's like, that's actually not healthy either. So it is it's like, how do you bring choice into this beautiful world of social to actually give you a jungle gym to play in for this game of life?
Yeah. And for my heady listeners, my husband is like this, where he gets very stuck. And like certain people I know get very stuck in asking themselves that question, where is this coming from? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And they get stuck on finding the tangible moment. And I've had to really work with him and be like, okay, listen, there's actually this Bible verse that talked about the sins of the father are paid by the son or something like that. And there's a different perspective I came across. I wish I could remember where I learned this. I learned this from a few different areas, something called recall healing. What else? Was it Kabbalah that talks about this? I don't remember. There was some other spiritual teaching that was like, actually, it has to do with reincarnation and that you reincarnate every third or fourth generation down. And so you are actually just playing out your old baggage and timeline from 3 or 4 generations ago. So the father and the son was actually just a metaphor. And it's not that there was a cruel God saying a son will pay for his father's sins. It's that you are both the son and the father in that story. And so part of the reason I left the path of becoming a mental health counselor was I realized very quickly that healing is not linear and that going into our old story, it has a time and a place, but it is not the longest way to healing, because what happens is, and we're going to do a different podcast on this, is storytelling.
Yes. I was like, this is a big one.
The story we tell ourselves, that groove gets worn deeper and deeper. And so I would say witnessing yourself, if you can find the moment, that's great. If you can't, that's okay too. But where I do use exactly what Ash said in my own life is with my kids. When I see my kids spinning out over something, I use my discernment. I'm like, oh, wait, this isn't theirs. And I teach my kids, honey, sit with that for a second. I think you're playing out something that happened to me. And I want you to just take your hands and wipe your heart, wipe your arms, wipe it all day and say, this isn't mine, this isn't mine, this isn't mine, until you feel, I use her sign, satisfied, going back to the human design chart. And once you feel sad, go back into that and see, how do you feel now? Does it feel different in your body? Do you feel calmer? Do you think this is still bothering you?
Is it still there? Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so that's how I apply that for little kids, because obviously we're not going to talk about past lives with them. That would be, unless they're bringing it up, and then we'll go there.
Well, even then, I don't know if I'd go there, but they're children are gifts. I mean, we know that children are gifts to the parents, but they will show them, like they'll show them their unhealed stuff. Like that's actually what's such a gift. So the fact that you can actually even witness it, realize it's yours, realize it's being played out, and actually just give her permission to be like, hey, thank you so much for showing that for me. I really appreciate that. But we don't need to hold that. that. It's okay. It's beautiful that you do. I think the corresponding spiritual law is the law of cause and effect, or the butterfly effect, right? Like the butterfly wings it'll affect, like everything has an effect. I was actually just teaching our kids about this the other day. Like everything that we do has a ripple. We don't even realize how much our little choices are rippling towards so many new realities or new ways of being.
It creates a whole other perspective. And I see this play out too a lot with childhood trauma and the choices we make and that ripple effect and where it goes. And to like bring it back to that Karpman's triangle,
which is the victim, villain, hero,
and the witnessing of yourself and the discernment. I had a YouTube short kind of get some traction where people ended up trauma dumping all over the comment. There was a couple things that were happening. And so what I'm saying does not apply to every single comment on that one, but there were these moments where people were sharing their trauma and pushing it forward as if a singular truth. There were these moments where I just wanted to be like, how do I explain this? Okay. So basically, when it comes to the childhood trauma, I think when we go back to Karpman's triangle, recognizing that in order to smash our way out of that when it comes to our childhood trauma is to recognize that it ends with you and that you're not going to play the victim, the hero, or the perpetrator. Instead, what you can do is rewrite that victim story from other perspectives of acceptance.
The way that I've explained it or worked with it with my clients is that it's an evolution out of. So the victim actually evolves into the creator, because the victim's actually really good at telling stories of like, woe is me, why me? So you're good at storytelling. Wonderful. Let's actually tell stories that are for you, right? The villain evolves into the challenger. Okay, great. You're not actually nothing's wrong with you. You're not bad. You just challenge people sometimes. And then the hero evolves into the coach, meaning I'm not going to save you, but I can actually give you these guidelines of how this can help. And so you can actually move beyond it, but it takes the consciousness to evolve. The quote I've heard is that I loved, I don't know where it comes from, is what happened to you growing up is not your fault, but as an adult, it is now your responsibility to address it.
Yes. And so that's not to say that you can't talk about your childhood trauma. I like that you gave these other perspectives of like the coach, because that was actually the example that came through for me, because you can talk about it in an embodied way. And the people that were in the comment section talking from that coach perspective was like, listen, my situation is different than what you're explaining. So they're accepting like, okay, not everyone is my exact story. Here's another perspective and a cautionary tale though for other people that need to hear it.
That's discernment.
And I had so much respect for the people that were able to address it like that versus the people that started with, you're horrible, my parent did this, and now I have X, Y, and Z. And so we're casting judgments, we're pointing fingers, we're saying their situation is exactly the situation I'm describing, which it wasn't. And then they were also playing victim. Yeah. And so somebody actually was said to me, I hope after seeing all these comments, you've changed what your stance on this. And I was like, actually, I haven't. Like, I just have more compassion for how many people are still in so much pain because they're letting their childhood run the show. And that's it. When we use social media and these different things, we can shift into those higher perspectives. We can go ahead and recognize it's not that you can't share your story. Nobody is telling you to silence yourself if you feel called to share, but it's about sharing from a way that's not furthering the hurt and pain and spreading it out to others. And that was really, the reason in the idea of, is social media detriment, or is it really the ultimate classroom for our healing? Is we have this continuous 24/7 opportunity to play around with how we would respond and see and discern how that lands in our body and how that lands with other people and whatever else it is. And you can actually play it out, or you could just do it quietly by yourself.
Totally. The metaphor that comes up for me with this is like, okay, if I have a hammer, I can do amazing things with that hammer, right? I can build a house with the hammer. I can build a place set. Like I can build things with that hammer, but also I could hurt someone with that hammer. It's just a tool. What consciousness you bring to that tool and what vision and how you use your imagination with that tool, that's actually what can make these beautiful, amazing creations, or can be really hurtful and really, really harmful. It's actually how do we use this tool? And I think that's what's been fun about this podcast. We've given you so many fun ways to think about, how do I use this as a tool? How do I take this hammer and build something cool with it?
Yeah. And recognize it's not going to be perfect. Like you're going to have some lopsided birdhouses excuses, so to speak, when you're first using that hammer. And it's just about getting up and trying again. And I always say it's not about necessarily how that laid out, it's how quickly you can return and recover.
Yeah.
That's really what we want to use as the measuring stick, not the perfect response every single time. It's the repair.
That had been one of the hardest things along my healing journey is to realize in Western astrology of a Virgo rising, 29 degrees, I had a very big shadow of perfectionism of like, I'm not doing it right. There's something wrong with me. I have to get it right. To learn that actually what matters most is the repair, that you can give yourself a break, that actually it's okay, that we're going to make mistakes. That's part of being human. And that the repair is actually the thing that matters the most. I mean, that's the coolest gift to give to yourself and to others.
It really is. And speaking of gifts to give yourself and others, be sure to share this with somebody, a friend, leave us a review. It helps our podcast get seen more. Make sure to hit that follow button on your preferred podcast provider so you don't miss future episodes. And we hope you guys get to play around with this week if that feels right for you. We would love to hear it. I'm at the Confused Mom on Instagram. Ash is cosmicalchemy.co.
I'm actually reclaimwithin.co. I shifted. Yeah, I'm changing things up.
Well, we'll leave links to it in the show notes. And have a great week, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is a big one, so go easy with yourselves. It's a lot.